Welcome to another conversation with Griff. My guest today is Michael Farber, an old friend going back to 1979, and we'll talk about the Expos in those days. We'll talk about a lot of things, but Mike's credentials: Hockey Hall of Famer, Elmer Ferguson Award, Montreal Gazette reporter and columnist from 1979 to 94, winner of 2 national newspaper awards, Sports Illustrated, hockey reporter 1994 to 2014, CJAD radio, contributor editorialist 1991 to 2018, currently with 690 TSN Montreal with the great Mitch Melnick as a host, and a TSN feature contributor. And I love those features. I mean, just before we get into the other stuff, what's the difference between doing a feature for TV and writing a great column?
You lose control. You are at the mercy of the producer. And he is the most important part of the entire process. And you're just the guy asking questions and writing the script. But what people see on television is really the work of the producer. And I'm just kind of his wingman. And that's quite different than writing, where you do depend on editors, and at Sports Illustrated we have fabulous photographers, and that's why they called it Illustrated. But you were mostly out there on an island, and that's not true of television at all.
To finish up the intro, it's a lengthy one because it's been a lengthy and storied career. Father and grandfather, Canadian citizen since 2017, is that right?
Yeah.
And one of your biggest thrills would have to be the Sochi Olympics, which was your last Olympics, and working alongside your daughter, Gabrielle, who was working with NBC. She's a Russian speaker, and so was helping out in that regard at, of course, a world event where the Russians are prominent, and it was there. So was that one of your biggest thrills?
It was great, in part because she had access to the NBC commissary. And the food in the press area for us peons was horrible. So she would sneak food out of the NBC commissary and bring it to me in the main press center so I didn't starve. It was great seeing her at those Olympics. She ended up covering several others, including Tokyo, Beijing, South Korea. She was at Reuters for those, and actually she won the Reuters Global Scoop, whole company, for her work in Tokyo. You may remember the Belarusian sprinter who defected to Poland at that point, and she wrote that story, and she had sources in the Belarusian opposition. And I don't think I've ever uttered that sentence before or since. Not too many of us have sources in the Belarusian opposition who kept her off. She's now left journalism, and she's in the process of becoming a veterinarian, which is quite a U-turn in her career.
Yeah, she's got sources in the pound, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, she speaks 4 languages, and soon she'll talk dog.
But that's great. And just people may have perked up when I said became a Canadian citizen in 2017. This is a guy, Michael Farber, I've known since 1979. We've been friends ever since, but grew up in New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me Jersey Shore growing up, Springsteen at the Stone Pony. Tell me that story.
No, at the Rutgers Commons or at Rutgers somewhere, I think in 71. And it was like $250 or something to see him. And I saw him a second time. He was a warm-up act at Madison Square Garden for Chicago. And I had a friend in from out of town. I said, we're going to go to the Garden. She was from Michigan. We're going to go see Chicago in the Garden. We're going to the Garden. She had no understanding that the Garden was indoors. She thought it was an outdoor arena. So Yeah, and growing up in New Jersey, my father's family was from Brooklyn, and baseball was everything. My mother told the story that the first time she met his mother in their apartment in Brooklyn, and this would have been in 1947, I think, possibly 48, but I think 47. She was ignored because she said a Dodgers game was on television. And she got quite upset with my father. Now, somehow I doubt they had a television in 47, but I think they probably, so, in fact, my father died in 53. I was 20 months old, and I'd always been told he'd gone to a Dodgers game and fell ill and died overnight. Only recently, when Duke Snyder died, I learned he'd actually been in a Yankees game, which struck me as odd because he was a big Dodgers fan. But baseball is what defined us. And these were our conversations. And so we knew about the seasons, and I learned about numbers from baseball. I learned about geography. Okay, where is Cleveland? Oh, there it is, because they're the Indians. So it was a great learning experience.
The Ebbets Field, you said that you were at one game at Ebbets Field, and you must have been not old enough to remember it.
Well, actually, I do remember it because Dodgers beat the Pirates, and as I recall, Gino Smoley hit a 2-run home run in the 8th and 9th. So upper deck, the last year the Dodgers were there, a lot of time in Yankee Stadium. Old Timers Day was always a big deal. We'd always go to Old Timers Day, and there would be DiMaggio running out on the field, the greatest living Yankee.
Even if he does himself.
Well, yeah, well, that was DiMaggio. Polo Grounds, we were out of the metropolitan area for a year, moved back, and that's when the Mets started playing. I went to opening day in '63. Ernie Broglio against Roger Craig, sat in box seats next to Gene Krupa. Some of your older listeners might remember Gene Krupa, the great jazz drummer, and Jimmy Dean, the pork sausage king. Now, this was during Passover, and I'm with my grandmother. And we brought chopped liver on matzah sandwiches. And we gave one to Jimmy Dean, the pork sausage king. So, that was a thing.
Did it ever show up on his any of his menus down the road?
It didn't. He didn't. There was no Twitter then, so we couldn't take a picture of it and put it on social media. But yeah, that was. But this kind of was our life. And Duke Snyder was in center field that day for the Mets, and you would recall this during the '81 playoffs, when the Expos were in Philadelphia, staying at that old CP hotel. Remember that?
Yep.
And my mother and her husband at the time drove down to see the game, and I met them in the lobby of the hotel, and people were milling around, including Duke. I said, "Yeah, you want to meet Duke Snyder?" Oh, she said, "Oh, sure." So I brought her over to Duke Snyder, and Duke, this is my mother, and yes, nice to meet you. And the first words out of her mouth were, "If you didn't swing at all those bad pitches, my first husband would still be alive."
Nice
opening, yeah.
The Duke Snyder, I don't know if at any of the games you were at, or at the game you were at Ebbets Field, you saw Israel Shapiro. Do you remember Israel Shapiro?
I do not.
He was a homeless guy in New York, and he was the biggest Duke Snyder fan. he had onset of dementia at some point, and he had big knots on his head from being clubbed by police officers. And he would meet us at the hotel in New York every time we arrived. And when Duke got off the bus, he would go, "Duke Snyder." And Duke put me in charge of taking care of Israel and making sure that he wasn't harmed by hotel security, because he'd go through the revolving door and come out the other side because security would be all over him.
Well, there's a picture of my grandmother on the front page of the Brooklyn Eagle after the Dodgers clinched, maybe 55, kissing Gil Hodges. And so that's, when you were from there, I mean, you were crazy about the Dodgers.
Yeah, absolutely. So it brings me to the question of, why would a Rutgers grad and a Bergen record reporter end up covering the Expos starting in 1979?
Well, the day that George Brett hit 3 home runs in the playoff games against the Yankees, it was a Friday, I decided, okay, I'll do it, because my wife, didn't much care for New Jersey. She's from Montreal. I said, "Oh, I'm young. I'll try to get a job in another country." What did I know? And that's in October, and I was turned down. Canada wouldn't let me in. Yeah, wise choice. But Lloyd Axworthy was the immigration minister at the time, and the Gazette appealed to him because it had to prove that I was not taking a job from a Canadian, and that they couldn't find anyone else to do that in the way that I could. And so April, I finally got in the country, and I'll tell you this. It was the start of the playoffs, and I was driving through the border, and you hope you have all the papers right. I mean, there's a lot of red tape to go through, and you just hope, they're not going to say, "Oh, no, you're missing this paper, go home." And there was a playoff game where there was a huge fight. One of the ones where they have to tack on the minute to the next period because there's just too much going on. And so the border officials didn't want anything to do with me until all this was settled. They were watching a hockey game. So finally we get through all the process, and 45 minutes later, okay, you're good to go. I'm a landed immigrant in Canada. And just before I left, the customs official or the border official says to me, "You're going the wrong way." Bienvenue au Canada. This was shortly before the referendum, the first referendum. So I think that's what the reference was to. But yeah, I covered the Yankees in 77 and most of 78, and then I became a columnist at the Record in North Jersey, and so I, baseball was basically what I did. I'd covered the Rangers like in 76, but I was kind of the baseball guy. And coming to Montreal, as 79 was just a great year because it would be the last of the Canadians' Stanley Cups in that 4-year run. And the Expos absolutely blossomed, and you had a city hungry for baseball, and there was an exciting team, and it seemed fresh and fun. And after the uber seriousness of the Yankees, I mean, this was just like a flower blooming, and I was happy to be part of it.
Well, I was going to say that I think you did go to spring training 79 to cover, right?
No, I went to spring training in 80.
1980? That's when I met you and Danielle. Danielle was your fiance at the time.
Yeah.
And we played a little tennis at the Inn at Indigo. I got to know you because we were at the same hotel. We were going to the same place every day. and we've been friends ever since. And like, it struck me that it was a bad Expos team through 1978, improving young players. It was a team that had just moved into a big monstrosity at Olympic Stadium. And then you show up, and as you point out, the team took off. And to me, I don't know what your impressions were of this young team, because you came from New York, completely different situation, and you alluded to it. But here's a young team, mostly single. After games, they're going downtown, and they become part of the fabric of the city. And a lot of those people who grew up in that time period remember fondly specific players because of their interaction with them on a social basis, not just on the field. That doesn't happen anymore.
Well, I wasn't a downtown guy, so I really didn't see that part of the Expo community blending. But what I did see were players on the metro, the subway here, and riding to the ballpark. They weren't going in SUVs with tinted windows, pulling in, pulling out. You'd see players, not strap hangers, because there weren't any straps like there were in old New York subways, but just people riding the metro. There was a commonality. But I think what made the Expos teams was the way they played. And if people familiar with the Canadians, or at least the Canadians lore, it was fire wagon hockey. Well, the Expo teams, and Dave Van Horn called it the track team in the years 79 through 81 or 82. I called it fire wagon baseball. It was just thrilling. We're not used to seeing that game now, but at the time it was National League baseball, and we had always grown up National League fans. We hated the Yankees. The family loved the National League and everything it represented. And I was a Milwaukee Braves fan growing up. Hank Aaron was my guy. And that's the kind of baseball we liked. We liked Clemente. We didn't like Mays because he was with the Giants. But this is what we liked. And then I saw that the iteration of that in Montreal. And for a time, and contradict me, but I think the Expos were bigger than the Canadians.
Yeah, I do believe so, even though, both teams were having success, but it was the way, I believe, and I agree with you 100%, the way the Expos were playing the game. I mean, the Blue Jay fans brag about their great young outfield of the mid 80s. But in 79, you had Warren Cromartie, Andre Dawson, and Ellis Valentine. And I think they combined for 58 outfield assists in 78, the year before they became good. And like, this was a team, and it seemed like National League franchises built artificial turf fields, home stadium, first because they were multi-purpose, but second because it promoted, which came first, the chicken or the egg? They played that type of what you describe as National League baseball. And that's what I grew up with. And when I came to cover the Blue Jays and didn't see it, it took me a while to get used to it.
Yeah, it was Earl Weaver 3-run home run philosophy in the American League. And this is why I was so partial to National League, because of the sizzle and the star players. Now, I mean, yeah, the Yankees had some players, and I admired Al Kaline, and there were American leaguers I liked. But I used to sit up at night wondering when the All-Star teams would be announced. The National League would have Mays, Aaron, Robinson, Clemente. And okay, who wasn't going to be starting? And why did my guy, Hank Aaron, have to play left field? Because Clemente was going to be in right, or maybe Robinson. And these things would bother me as a kid. I just wonder now if anyone looks at the All-Star game and cares to the degree that I did, or because of the way the game has evolved and interleague play and everything else, that National League and American League were separate, and you kept track. I mean, who led more All-Star games? How many games had the National League won in a row? These were things. And baseball, at a time when baseball was a national sport in the United States and the NFL wasn't.
Yeah, and talking about all-star games, there were 3 or 4 starters every game who played all 9 innings. Who didn't want to come out of the game. Who said, this is a matter of league pride. The 2 presidents, the AL and NL president, it was a real blood battle between the 2 leagues. And that just doesn't happen. Now they're trying to get everybody in the game, and they've made all sorts of unusual rules to make sure that it's all about the players and not the leagues. So, but what do you remember about your first impressions of Olympic Stadium, and how did that evolve? And did you think after a while, when American outlets kept making fun of the stadium and looked down on the franchise, when did you become a screw you guys?
Fairly early on, because I don't think people grasped just the amount of joy that people were having, the fans were having there, the oompa bands, when you'd walk in through the metro, that it was easy to get to. It was a happy place. And a lot of it was goofy, starting with the hats, tricolored caps, and the scoreboard chickens.
Yeah, I was going to say the scoreboard chickens, where you had guys trying to see how many chickens there were by keep throwing over to first base.
Who was that Cardinal lefty that one day just decided to blow up the scoreboard? I
thought that pitcher was Larry Christensen with the Phillies, but
I remember a Cardinals. Yeah, I mean, it was a fun thing. I mean, It was goofy. And again, I'm coming in as an outsider, but it struck me that it's our goofy.
Yeah.
It belonged to a place. It was authentic. And if you look at the history of the Expos and jumping ahead, when Mark Langston is there in the year that they decide, okay, we're going for it, and Randy Johnson's traded to Seattle. Mark Langston, a very good lefty, comes, and suddenly there are K signs in the stands, especially out in the left field bleachers. And I thought, that's great. That's authentic. No one told them to do it. And of course, 2 starts later, they were K sign sponsored by Chrysler because of K cars. I said, okay, you just crashed through this great, authentic, Montreal thing. It didn't start in Montreal, obviously. People saw it elsewhere, but they adopted it. It was a baseball thing, not trying to be monetized.
Yeah, that was '89 when they made the mistake of trading Randy Johnson. He wasn't Randy Johnson yet, and there were people within the organization who, this 6'11" kid couldn't find the strike zone. There were people in the front office who were advocating releasing him, so that at least they got something for him. They got Mark Langston for him. And I remember Mark Langston showing up for a start in San Diego against the Padres, and he was awesome. It was lights out, and he was striking out a bunch of guys. But after the game, he flew home. He had business to take care of, and he had just come to pitch. So of course, Denis Martinez. Denis Martinez is like, I'm the main guy on this team. How can he go home? So 2 days later, Denis pitched against the Padres to wrap up the series, and he said, I got to go home and take care of some business. And I just shook my head. Here's a power play if I've ever seen one.
Since we're kind of freestyling here, there was a game in San Diego where another Expos pitcher, Pascual Perez, your favorite, was at the plate, and Nelson Santavina, a heavy-legged catcher was on third, and the squeeze was on, except Pascual was swinging away and nearly killed Santavina. So the squeeze is on the next pitch, and Pascual doesn't turn around to bunt, and Santavina is running down the line. And after the game, I guess Pascual fouled the ball off again. I said, what was all that about? And he said, well, I'm yelling at him in Spanish. We got the squeeze on, squeeze. I said, all right, what's the Spanish word for squeeze? He said, squeeze.
Well, I remember, I tell that story all the time, that same story. It's one of my favorite Pascual stories. And the kicker was that after he fouled off the first pitch, I think it was Russ Nixon at third base, the coach, and he came in and verbally told Pascual, you missed a squeeze, we're going to do it again. And he went back to third and he fouled off another pitch. So that sort of adds to the context of that story.
Well, one of the beautiful things is when Pascual was pitching, as you would note, attendance went up. And that's the only time I saw that in Montreal. I grew up as a probable pitchers guy. I would always scan who the probable pitchers were in the newspapers in New York to see which games I wanted to go to, because I wanted to see Koufax, who I saw pitch in his last year, and I wanted to see Marichal, and I wanted to see Gibson. And so I was always interested. Montreal, I never saw that unless it was Pascual Perez.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a cult of Pascual Perez, and they would fill it out at all those home games. But I remember Pascual when he was in rehab during spring training, drug rehab and spring training. We looked from the parking lot one day, and he was driving by in a white convertible, waving at everybody at the facility. And I'm going, what kind of a rehab place is this? And the first game back, he gave up like 3 runs in the first inning. And you know how my game notes would not fly in today's baseball, because there was just too much joy in the game notes. But so Pascual gave up 2 or 3 runs in the first inning, but then when he came up, he got a single. And I said that, hey, we're going to sign the hitting coach at the rehab center, but not the hitting coach. I don't think I'd get away with that today.
No, I don't think that would fly at all.
So 95 wins in the first year that you're there, 15 doubleheaders, and like 15 double. And then on the final day of the season, our bags were packed, I'm sure yours were, to go to Atlanta for a doubleheader that was rained out.
No, actually, because I spent most of the last month of that season with the Pirates.
Oh, okay.
And because, we had enough people covering the Expos. So I basically spent 3 weeks solid with the Pirates, and they were fabulous. I loved being around that team. And so on the Sunday, I guess it was clinched on Saturday, was it not? The next
no, it was clinched on Sunday because there was a chance that we would have had to fly to Atlanta to play a doubleheader and win both games in order to force a playoff.
Well, it was Sunday afternoon. The Pirates close out the season. I'm going home. The Expos are not going anywhere. And so I write quickly and I go to the airport, and the old Pittsburgh airport, which was kind of a homey place, not anything like the new one. And there was a coffee shop. You remember coffee shops? Right there by the entrance. And there was Dave Parker, who sees me get out of the taxi. He leaves the coffee shop, comes out the door, comes up to me and shakes my hand, says, "Thank you for covering us. It was fun having you around, and good luck." And the relationships that you could forge at that time, even with some idiot from Montreal, and being around in the access and the willingness to share is something that's not lacking only in baseball, but in other sports. The wall hadn't gone up yet. And that's why in 79, it was such great fun getting to be around baseball.
Yeah. Then in 1980, Ron LaFleur came in. I think they moved Warren Cromartie to first base and Tony Perez left the scene. So now Ron LaFleur and Rodney Scott. And you talk about National League Baseball, 97 steals and 63 steals from the top two guys in your lineup. I mean, that's a team that may have been better than the 79 team. Some of the young pitchers were becoming better. Steve Rogers was always the guy, always the starting pitcher that you built your rotation around. But the young guys were coming in. I just was struck by the uniqueness of Ron LaFleur, but by the numbers that those two guys put up.
Well, Ron, of course, played left field. And one day I'm at the park early, and Dick Williams, who was managing the Expos, walked out to left field and started looking up at the lights at the Olympic Stadium. And audibly, you could hear him curse, because the night before, LaFleur had misplayed a ball, said he lost it in his lights. So he'd look up and say, "Son of a bitch." And then he would move over a few feet. And this went on because he didn't believe that Ron LaFleur had missed the ball in the light. Well, Dick was checking the lights himself. One of the things I saw from Ron LaFleur occurred on the last day of the season. And you'll remember this certainly when he came out to pinch run.
Yes.
The other dugout, the tunnel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, they were playing the Pirates.
Yeah.
And he didn't think he was going to come in. He was injured, I think, wasn't he?
Yeah, he had a broken wrist or something.
Yeah.
He had a cast on his arm, but they used him to pinch run. He came out of the third base dugout.
Yeah, he had been in the Pirates training room. And Dick's going, where is Ron? We need him to pinch run. But speaking of Dick Williams, I mean, there is a guy who you either loved him or hated him, and I think more people hated him. He was irascible. He didn't suffer fools. He wasn't trying to be anyone's best friend. What was your impression of Dick Williams, who's now in the Hall of Fame?
You really want me to talk about this?
Yeah.
You were in Atlanta that night at the old Marriott.
Yes.
Okay. You remember what happened?
Tell me.
He went for me, and when the rooms weren't ready, he'd come in from Houston, and Ozzie Virgil pulled him off me, and he got fired a couple of weeks later. No, I was not friendly with Dick. First time I met him was after the Pearson Cup game. The Expos were in Chicago for a 3-game afternoon series. And I show up. Ian McDonald had covered the Pearson Cup game. I wasn't in Toronto, but I went to Chicago. And I see Dick in the lobby of whatever hotel it was. And I went up, Mr. Williams. I'm replacing Ian McDonald on this. And he says, where's Ian? And I won't finish the sentence. But we didn't get along from day one. And I remember when he got fired, I think it was a Tuesday in Philadelphia. So I got the call around 9:30 in the morning. And
were you in
Philadelphia? And I tell you, I was not sad.
Were you in Philadelphia?
I was in Montreal.
Oh, okay.
For the first game, I flew down that game. Ian McDonald's famous lead that somebody helped him with that night. So I'm kind of pleased I'm not going to have to deal with Dick anymore.
7:30 in the morning on that day that Dick got fired, John McHale called my room, and I mean, you've been around me long enough. 7:30 in the morning is not my optimum time when you're on the road.
No.
In Philly, there's places to go. So John says, "Can you come up to my suite?" And I went, "Sure." So I got dressed and went up to the suite, and he goes, "We're letting Dick Williams go." And I went, "What?" That sort of straightened me out right there. He said, "Can you get all the writers up here in a half hour?" I went, "Yeah." And then he struck me with, "Okay, guess who we're naming as manager?" And like, I'm not in a mood to guess, so I guess 5 or 6 names, not Jim Fanning. And he said, "Jim," and he started to giggle. And I don't think I'd ever seen him laugh before. But it was because Jim was familiar with the young players that would be coming up, guys like Terry Francona, Brad Mills, those guys. What was your impression of Jim as a manager, as a person and a manager? He was a prince. He was a sweetheart. He hired me in 1973 to do his stats for what would become arbitration and whatever. So I owed him a lot. I love the guy. What were your impressions of him as a manager and as a person?
Well, that first day, it's raining on and off. We're not sure if the game's going to be delayed or postponed or what have you. So I was in the clubhouse in his office until really late, like 15 minutes before the first pitch. And Jim's in uniform. And he says, "It's been so long since I've been in uniform, I can't remember if the flap on the baseball shoes goes under or over the laces." And I wrote a column for the Gazette that night saying the Expos have hired a manager who doesn't know how to tie his own shoes.
How'd that go?
Well, that first night he's in the on-deck circle multiple times, offering advice and what have you. And Ian McDonald's famous lead that night was, "Rain spoiled Jim Fanning's Expos managerial debut. It stopped."
That's a good lead.
Yeah. I wonder how Ian came up with it. But I love Jim. So, clearly he wasn't suited to that job. And one of the things that I regret a couple of years later, I was really on Felipe Alou. I thought he should be the next manager. When it was clear that Jim wasn't going to be. In fact, when Jim came back the following season, I had written a column in the Montreal Gazette saying, Jim should not be back this year. Thank him for everything, but move on. And John McHale started the press conference saying, "Today we'd like to announce, if it's okay with you, Mike, that Jim Fanning is coming back as the manager." But anyway, this wasn't going to work long term. And it was clear there was going to be a replacement. And I was pushing Felipe Alou in the column. And then I was out at the tennis tournament in Montreal at Jarry Park. And the Astros fired Bill Verdon. Now, I'd seen Verdon manage in New York. I really admired what he did with Houston and the fundamental play of the Astros. I said, that's what this team needs. And I got off Felipe and I got on Bill Verdon. And they did hire Bill Verdon, and he was terrible. Excuse me.
Yeah, the Jim Fanning hiring. You wrote about the shoe flaps, but I've worked with 19 major league managers now, and he's the only one who insisted on an IBM Selectric in his office downstairs because he wanted to answer all his own mail and stuff. And also the only manager and it's not like I purposely watch managers get dressed, but he's the only one who wore a cup.
Excuse
So
me.
that struck me as odd.
Yeah.
But the Bill Verdon years, I've tried to erase those from my memory banks. I mean, I just, his wife Shirley was sweet, but Bill, I've tried to erase that year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was, from my memory banks. He made it difficult for a young PR guy who was told that no media, even radio broadcasters, in the clubhouse pregame. So it made it easy for players just to say, I'll be right back, and then go in the clubhouse pregame and never come out. And that sort of is not the way that we try and promote sort of a peer level for media and players. And Duke Snyder was just irate that he couldn't get in the clubhouse before games to talk to players and whatever. And so they boycotted. It was just terrible. But going back to 82, I thought the 82 team could have been better than the 81 team. But somehow, Dave Van Horn says because Larry Parrish was traded. But I thought that they had a better all-around team, and you could blame Jim Fanning and his managing on a full season. But what were your thoughts on the 82 team?
Well, the right side of the infield was a sieve defensively. And I loved Al Oliver, who is now the first baseman. And Duke, and he comes up a lot here, kept saying, the Expos need a left-handed bat with hair on his butt. And that was Al Oliver.
Yeah.
And so now we're in Shea Stadium sometime in the summer. And he was hitting 370, whatever he was hitting at that point. And everything was a seed. Everything. And I've never seen a guy hit into more hard outs than Oliver. And he ended up winning the batting title, hitting 331. But I flew by the batting cage at Shea, and I said, with any luck, you'd be hitting 400. And he said something that has kind of become my guiding principle in life. He said, I can only hit it. I can't steer it.
Yeah. I remember the quote. You used it. And I still remember that and use that myself. Steal it from you.
Well, you steal it from Scoop because, as a writer, we deal with editors. And Sports Illustrated, for example, there were multiple levels of editing, and everyone wanted their fingerprints on it, especially baseball stories. Hockey, not so much, because people really didn't know hockey. But baseball, a lot of people, they know the game and they want to edit. And it's frustrating when someone messes with your copy.
Yeah.
And it got to a point where you just say, okay, I've written the story. I've hit the send button.
I can't steer it.
I can't steer it. I've done the best I could. I hit it. Now you guys decide. So the advice I give to young writers, okay, do your best and then let it go a little bit. And don't fight over every comma or all your favorite words.
There were some things with Al Oliver that I loved. And one of them was the day that, and by the time he got to the Expos, his arm was shot. He used to be an outfielder, great center fielder, outfielder. But by the time he came through Texas and to the Expos, his arm was shot. So he played first base, but he was like Steve Garvey. He didn't want to throw to second ever. On a ball hit to him, he didn't want to try and get the lead runner, because with Garvey, it was because he just stunk with the thrower. And with Al, it was because he had been injured so much. So the one play where Oliver tried to get the guy at second base and threw it to left field, and Cromartie or whoever was out there threw it. Oh, no, it must have been Raines, threw it to third base and got the out at third. So that's the 3-7 375 out at third. But the other thing that you referred to before, hair on his ass. Scoop was at a Perry G, one of his functions in April, and he was sitting by himself the night before the banquet. And so I went over and sat with him, and I said, Scoop, do you remember Dave LaPointe, big left-hander from Glens Falls, like David Palmer was? But he first pitch, he threw up and in at Scoop's head, and he just fell straight back to the ground, and he didn't move his feet. He just popped right back up. And the next pitch, he hit for a homer to right field. And I reminded him, I told him the story, and his face broke into a big smile. He said, "You remember that?" Yeah, that's what the thing I tell players when I'm coaching, you know? And he was so excited that I remembered that. Plus the fact that he was the only guy that you come in his locker and you know, the controversy with steroids, you would see, if you were looking in somebody's locker, you could see not human growth hormone, but whatever Mark McGuire had. But with Scoop, it was like 5 flavors of cologne, and he would switch them up every day. I said, and I reminded him of that, and he said, "You remember that?" I said, "How did I not?" But yeah, Scoop was a beauty. He was a great hitter still when he arrived, but his arm was shot. But he was just so good to interview and be around. And I'm glad. I love that story about you can't steer it. But
these were fascinating teams, and you know the window was open, and it was Woody Fryman who told me, "You have 5 good years, and what you do in that 5-year period cements who you are." And other than 81, there's nothing to show for it. And the night it all ended for me was that doubleheader against the Phillies in '83 in September, because I think they were 2 back and lost both games of a doubleheader at Olympic Stadium that had been delayed by rain night. So they played 2 and lost both. And I think that was the moment when that whole dream fell apart, and you know everything after that was just scrambling, including signing Pete Rose in '84, and things were gone. And if you look 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, those are your Woody Fryman 5 years.
Yeah, the 82 was another good team that sort of went by the wayside. But I think the moment, to me, you point to a moment, but was the Bill Lee, Rodney Scott incident sort of shredded what was going on in the clubhouse. What was your impression of a guy, Bill Lee, leaving the ballpark, coming back? I mean, he was eccentric, he was weird, and he was purposeful about his eccentricity.
Yeah, and I really liked Bill because I'd known him when he was pitching Boston against the Yankees and the Brawls and Greg Nettles and all that. And I remember I was actually in hospital in Boston in '79 when the trade was made, and there was a graffiti on a wall outside my hospital room that says, "Who is Stan Pappy?" And so Bill pulls his bill over Rodney Scott's release. So I called Bernie Carbo, or tried to call Bernie Carbo. And for those with really long memories, he'd done the same thing in Boston, or similar things in Boston, when Bernie Carbo, his buddy, and one of the heroes of the '75 Red Sox team that played the Reds in the World Series. And at this point, Carbo was playing in Mexico. And at the Gazette, there was a telephone operator who spoke Spanish, and I had her leaving messages at hotels all over Mexico. Couldn't get them. So I ended up getting Carbo's mother in Wisconsin, maybe. I can't remember. And she says, "Well, what do you want with Bernie?" And I told her the story about Bill and how similar to what happened with Carbo and Bill in Boston. And she said, Bernie always told Bill to mind his own business, which didn't go over very well when I wrote that. But, we keep looking for history repeating itself in our lives. And this is we're conditioned that way. It's probably not a good thing to do because every act has to be judged on its own. And just retreating a couple of years, when Steve Rogers came in pitching relief on Blue Monday, my mind immediately went back to Dennis Leonard, the Royals, coming in to pitch in Game 5 in the playoffs against the Yankees. And I guess that would have been 77. Right-hander, sinker baller. And Chris Chambliss hit a kind of a bouncer single. And anyway, Kansas City ends up losing. And so you were conditioned to think back, well, what have I seen before? And so in Bill's case, and I remember the Bernie Carbo stuff, so that's where I went.
Yeah, I remember it. The next morning, I was in early at the office at Olympic Stadium to do the game notes and to get the minor. So I went to get the minor league reports off the fax machine, and I had to go by John McHale's office, and he always closed his door at night. The door was open a sliver, and I went, well, that's odd. He always closes the door, and I stopped the urge to go close it or go look in, and I went back to my office. And the next thing I know, like an hour later, when everybody's coming in the office, there's a commotion on the other side, and Bill Lee had been on the floor with a carton of milk from like 7 a.m. waiting for John McHale to come in. Yeah. It's case that I'm going, this guy is a little out there, but I could have gone in and talked him off the ledge if I had just bothered to go see what was going on in his office. But in 1981, when the strike hit, and I want to ask you your impressions of the strike and the solution of a split season, and where a team that had the best record didn't make it to the postseason. But in 81, during the strike, Bill Lee was a key member of the team, and he flew home with his then wife, and he said he was retiring. He wasn't coming back. He was tired of it. He was in Bellingham, Washington, and retiring. So it was a concern because when the strike was settled in spring training, the second spring training occurred, he didn't come. And then I went to John McHale and said, I know this is a problem. I know we need Bill. What if you tell him that he can start the game at Fenway Park, the exhibition on the way north? And John went, oh, it's worth a try. He was on the next plane to come down and be ready and to go to Fenway because he had such a history and wanted to. He was just eccentric. But yeah, that was my strike memory. But what was your impression of the commissioner's decision to have a split season where odd things could occur?
Well, and certainly they did to the benefit of the Expos. I guess it was the Cardinals who got hosed by what happened. That I ended up that year doing other things during the strike. I covered the royal wedding, Charles and Diana, for the Montreal Gazette. They posed me in a top hat, which is stupid.
I think I remember the photo.
yeah, that wasn't great. I went out to Denver to see the Expos affiliate managed by Felipe Alou playing in Mile High Stadium. So, you know, I just, okay, if you're not going to play, I'm not going to write. So after, the initial thing, and I backed the players, and I remember Red Fisher and I had dueling columns on this
Hmm.
at the Gazette, and then I just said, "Oh, when you come back, I'll be here."
The two things before we wrap up, and this has been great. One of them is how much do you recall? And it stuck with me 46 years later. We were at the winter meetings in Dallas in 1980, and Debbie, who I had just asked to marry me the day before, so we had gone to dinner. It was my tradition as a PR guy to take all the media to a dinner during the winter meetings because, after a deadline, nothing really happened. There were no cell phones or anything. It was great. And then we're riding a cab, you, me, and Debbie, back from the restaurant, and the cab is playing Beatles music. And we asked, "What's up?" And he said, "John Lennon got killed." And do you remember that? I mean, it sticks with you. Something like
Oh yeah,
with
yeah.
you.
In fact, she said John Lennon had been killed. It was a woman who was
Oh, yeah.
driving the taxi. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'm not sure it was where were you when, as a kid, President Kennedy's assassination is the one that resonates with me. I met other generations, it might be the Twin Towers. Um, for some, it might be Joe Carter's home run, who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was stunning that this had happened. And yeah, we were at the Lowe's Anatole Hotel, and the stuff that is buried just under the surface when we came up to the anniversary of it, and you pointed this out to me that yeah, it was one of those suddenly you can't breathe for an instant,
Yeah.
and you try to process it. I remember it very well.
I remember all those events that you just mentioned. I remember specifically too. They leave an impression on, no matter what your age, they leave an impression that probably lasts forever. One more thing before we wrap up, and
Yeah.
it's been almost an hour, which is great, is Tim Raines. I don't know if you won a national newspaper award for your coverage of Tim after his drug addiction problem. And I remember how it came about. I was in the office. Um, I think Wayne Parrish wrote a piece on it in the Toronto Star, and so I'm standing at the end of the dugout with Tim Raines, who was 23 years old. It was his 23rd birthday, and he goes, "Why do these things always happen to me? And like my career is ruined." And so the problem of the season finished, and he was sent to, I think, Orange County. Is that
Yeah.
right? And so the problem became, how do we handle this next spring? And my suggestion to John McHale was that we need to find one writer that we trust, send him to do the definitive story, somebody with empathy that can handle that. And then next spring, all he has to do is have an opening presser, say everything is in whoever, which turned out to be Michael Farber's piece. And so don't ask me anymore. And it worked out really well. You went to Orange, then you went to Sanford, Florida, where he grew up. Tell us about that.
Yeah, we spent quite a bit of time, especially at his home in Sanford, Florida. And the only thing that was off the record was we played some pickup basketball, which would have violated his contract at the time, as if cocaine didn't. But oh, you can't mention that we're shooting hoops out here. Yeah, that's fair. So yeah, the fact that he had disappointed Andre Dawson, I think, stayed with him, and I that was a time in baseball where cocaine was prevalent everywhere. Remember the cocaine trials in Pittsburgh, and Tim was not the only guy on that team. And you know this better than I, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I had a line in one Gazette story talking about cocaine use. I said the Expos aren't just Canada's team, they're Colombia's team, which upset the Colombian embassy to no end. But it was around the game. We would start to see steroids later. But at that time, cocaine was the drug of choice. And Tim he wasn't a kid, he was 23, you're a man. But he had gotten caught up with it. And I always had a soft spot for him.
Yeah. And then the next spring of '83, when he did show up to spring training, it worked out just like we had thought. You had written that empathetic piece explaining the childhood in Sanford, what happened to him, the temptations, the prevalence. And what struck me is that Andre Dawson came out for that initial presser with him and just stood there and basically adopted him after that. And I thought that was a turning point in his career.
What, John McHale just knew nothing about it. He was just so overwhelmed by all this information and, drugs. I don't know about that. And the naivete, and me too. I had to find out all about this stuff. So I had an education as well.
One more thing. You mentioned basketball. You mentioned shooting hoops with Rock, but it's a period of time when Dave Dombrowski was the GM, and you and me and Dave and a bunch of accountants and teachers and auto mechanics and whatever would go play basketball every Thursday night. And Dave Dombrowski, the GM of the Montreal Expos, who stayed in town for the winter, would come with us, and he'd shoot. And he had a nice little set shot from 3-point range or almost 3-point range. But then we would go to dinner. We'd go to get a bite to eat and some beer after at Mannion's or wherever we went. But what struck me as a PR guy for Dave Dombrowski is that nobody bothered him. Nobody recognized him. When you see that happening, do you smile when you see something like that?
Well, I used to tell him, you're nothing, because if Serge Savard, who was GM of the Canadians at that time, were here, he'd be mobbed. People ignore. So I used to kind of give him the business. And I'll finish with this about Dave. When he was GM of the Tigers, a fellow from the Gazette named Tim Simpson, who you probably don't know, was a computer guy, but he was from Windsor, Ontario, the biggest Tigers fan in existence, and he had terminal cancer. And through Dave, I arranged for Tim to go to Tiger Stadium, Comerica Park, and greeted him, put him up, his name on the scoreboard before the game, introduced him to players. Curtis Granderson spent 15 minutes talking with him. Verlander signed the ball. And Tim wrote that, "Now I know what heaven looks like." And this would have been June. He died in August. And this was because of Dombrowski. Dave made it happen entirely. And so I'm forever grateful for what he did.
Yeah, to me, I've been 53 years in baseball, and it's formed my life, shaped my life. But the memories and talking to you brings back so many of them. I appreciate that. And it's been great talking to you, Michael. and keep up the good fight. And we'll see you maybe in April.
Okay, we'll speak.
Thanks, Mike.